Hi, I'm David Garcia, audiophile dad and Texas technophile, and I'm here today to talk to you about technology in general, but about TVs. When it comes to televisions, there's two big technologies out there. One's called plasma, the other one's called LCD. And many consumers these days are very confused about which technology is right for them. So I want to try and help out with that today. First of all, one of the terms you hear very often in the market is a term called hertz, especially when it comes to LCD televisions. You've got 60 hertz LCD, 120 hertz LCD, 240 hertz LCD, and now even 480 hertz LCD. And then when it comes to plasma, plasma is associated with a term called 600 hertz. Well, what does all this mean? All these different hertz terms make most consumers' head hurt, quite frankly. So let's try and straighten that out a little bit. First, let's talk about LCD. And by the way, what you see in the background with me right now is a plasma television. I'm sorry I don't have an LCD for you to look at, but still, I want to give you the facts and how you can choose. First of all, with LCD, when we first started out with LCD, we had 60 hertz television. Now, these were great technology televisions, but one of the problems that people often complained about was an artifact, if you will, known as motion blur. Meaning whenever there was fast-moving motion going across the screen, sometimes you would see like a comet effect or a blurry effect. And the reason for this is televisions display video at 60 frames per second. And on an LCD, there is some challenges to displaying that 60 frames of video per second in a smooth manner. So what did the industry do? They developed 120 hertz. Now, what does 120 hertz mean? Basically, it means you're displaying 120 frames per second now, as opposed to 60 frames per second. But wait a minute, didn't I just say there's only 60 frames of video information per second? Absolutely. So how do we get 120 frames per second now? That's easy. The TV manufacturers, in their infinite wisdom and technology, developed processors that could look at the video, look at frame number 1, look at frame number 2, and determine if there was a frame in between these two frames, this is what it would look like and create that. This is known as MEMC, or Motion Estimated Motion Creation. It's an artificially created frame that's inserted between the original video frames. By inserting one of these frames between each original video frame, 60 frames per second now goes to 120 frames per second. And this was a huge step forward for LCD televisions. But what about 240 hertz? Well, it gets a little more complicated now. There's a couple of different ways of doing that. One of them is the MEMC way, as I've already stated. But now we're actually inserting 3 artificially created video frames between the original video frames. So now I have frame number 1 and frame number 2 and 3 artificially created frames inserted in between these to now increase my frame rate to 240 frames per second. But there's another way of doing 240 frames per second. It's known as black frame insertion. So with the black frame insertion method, you still have your original video frames, 60 video frames per second, and we use the 120 hertz method of inserting one artificially determined video frame between each original video frame. And then there's also 2 black frame insertions in between the original video frames. So essentially what you end up with is original video frame, black frame insertion, MEMC frame, black frame insertion, second original video frame. Now both of these achieve similar effects in smoothing out the motion, but they differ. Now with the black frame insertion, what I would point out to you is this is very similar to the way a commercial movie projector works, because film is actually shot at 24 frames per second. Now if we were to watch film at 24 frames per second, we would see an enormous amount of flicker. So what a commercial movie theater does with their projector is they actually have a shutter that opens and closes very quickly over that lens, creating black frame insertions, if you will. So in a commercial movie projector, you're viewing video at either 48 frames per second, 72 frames per second, or maybe even 96 frames per second, depending on how quickly that shutter opens and closes. The reason for this problem with an LCD panel is the way it displays an image. Now, you have to understand each of the 60 frames of information in a video image are unique frames, almost like a JPEG image, if you will. So on an LCD panel, because of the way the technology works, is known as sample and hold. So imagine, if you will, for a moment, 60 frames per second, each of those images is on the screen as a still image until another image comes along to replace it. Now that seems simple enough, but at 60 frames per second, you do end up with an artifact known as motion blur. So increasing the frame rate smooths out that video immensely. But now let's talk about plasma. Plasma claims to have 600 hertz per second. Okay, what does that actually mean? Well, guess what? Plasma is still only 60 frames per second as well. But here's the trick. Plasma differs from an LCD panel in that it creates its own light. It's what we call emissive technology. So these pixels actually fire and light up and turn off all by themselves. So in a plasma image, each time an image is on the screen, each image is on the screen for 1/60th of a second, but in the 1/60th of a second that image is on the screen, those pixels are pulsing on and off 10 times per image. So if you take 10 times 60 images, what do you have? 600 hertz technology. Now it begs the question, which technology do I buy? Do I want LCD or do I want plasma? Well, really at the end of the day, the choice is really up to you. Both have pros, both have cons. LCD is a little more energy efficient, if you will. Plasma uses a little bit more energy. Plasma is known to yield better black levels and better color saturation than LCD. So how do I choose? Well, it's really quite simple. You see a lot of terms out there. Now, the simplest way I can explain this to you is one person likes Pepsi, another person likes Coca-Cola. Okay? We all have different taste buds. So what I suggest to you is use these taste buds, your eyes. Let your eyes be the judge and choose the technology that you enjoy the most. For Audiophile Dad and Texas Technophile, this is David Garcia. Thank you.